you worked in Bosnia to help people who are traumatized severely, like rape and losing loved ones. Can you tell me a little bit experience of how you used EFT?
Yes, absolutely. I was invited to go to Bosnia by a charity, a British charity, Healing Hands Network, and we were doing, it was a pilot project, so we were doing like a study to see how effective matrix reimprinting would be in reducing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And they selected 16 clients who would work with us over 2 weeks. So we had an introductory group session with 2 different groups of 8 people, because they were in 2 different places, in Sarajevo and in a town near there called Helsinki. And we introduced the techniques to them. And then each person, all the 16, had 4 one-hour sessions with myself and Fiona Smith, who went with me. And then we finished with a group session to round it up and get some feedback and find out how they were. Before we saw anybody, we asked them to fill in a questionnaire. And we used standard questions to measure how severe the post-traumatic stress disorder was. And several of the people, when we got the forms back, we measured on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the worst it could be, with those feelings of getting flashbacks and nightmares, whether they felt numb, unable to associate with friends and family, and all those symptoms that are so happen with everybody really, or many of them with post-traumatic stress disorder. And several of them were scored extremely highly. In fact, 3 of them were almost all 10s. So it was really severe for them. Almost all the clients that we saw had been victims in concentration camps during the war. In varying amounts of time. One lady I worked with had been in a camp for 9 months. She was in one of the rape camps that they were called, so and suffered terribly during that time, as they all did. There was no food, they had no water a lot of the time, and they never knew which of the women in this camps would be taken by a group of men who would come in 5 times a day and select a woman at random, and they would be brutally raped at that time. They went through terrible things during the war. The men, with them it was more beatings that they'd experienced. There was one lovely man who did score extremely highly. He was all 10s on these symptoms. He was selected he was tortured for 36 hours because they didn't like the job that he was doing. And these are the type of things that we were working with. And we used EFT to begin with, just to gently, and it's a very gentle process, particularly when you get to the matrix reimprinting, just to build up the confidence a little. And then as soon as we could with everybody, used matrix reimprinting, which I believe Carl has described to you, so that if the people didn't want to, they didn't have to tell us what had happened. It was all done internally, and they could talk to the people they did, bring any resources they wanted to, and really change that picture, so that all those feelings that they were still reliving so many times, with the flashbacks and things, just completely changed, and replace it with a much more positive picture, so that they were in control and could let those feelings go.
Did you ask them the score after the session?
Yeah, well, at the end of the 2 weeks, we measure during the matrix. You always sort of have some sort of measure, and you can tell. And often it's when someone's in severe trauma, to ask them, you know, is this a scale of 0 to 10? You just know they're at a 10 anyway. But they'll say things like, "Oh, I didn't think I could feel this way again. You know, I never thought I'd be able to let that go. Wow, that was amazing. That was incredible." And just all these wonderful comments that you get. But the end of the 2 weeks, at the final group session, and I have to say, because I didn't mention that first group time we saw, it was very difficult for people. And the first thing we had to do was explain to them that what they were feeling was a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, and that the symptoms that they were feeling were normal. And they hadn't, nobody had told them that before.
Right.
And I think that's important for people to understand, that it's, what they're feeling is normal,
It's normal, yeah.
but it can change. Using these techniques, it can change. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, when we had the group session, it was so different. People were laughing and joking with each other, whereas the first time they couldn't talk, look at each other even at times.
Right.
There was one lady in particular who just sat quietly and looking down at the floor and didn't converse with anybody. After her second session, she walked through the door and walked in and said, "Hi," to everybody.
What a difference.
And she was smart. She was dressed nicely. It was so different. And at the final group session, she was talking in front of everybody, and that was a big thing for her. But we asked them to do another assessment, exactly the same questions, and for all of them, their scores had gone down. There was space for them to make comments about their experience and what they would like, and every single one of them said what they would like is for more matrix reimprinting practitioners to be there, which was just wonderful. But then following the 2 weeks, 4 weeks later, the representatives of Healing Hands Network in Bosnia asked them all to fill in a further questionnaire, again exactly the same questions. And what we found was very interesting, that some of those people, their scores had gone down even lower. And for those 3 people in particular where their scores were very high, they seemed to have the biggest change. And there were 2 men when their scores were all 1s. So they'd gone from a 10 being the worst it could be to being the least it could be. And that was just phenomenal. Absolutely amazing. The charity...
Definitely it's a very powerful tool, isn't it, for severe trauma?
Extremely powerful. And to be able to have, when this trauma happens, you're not in control of the situation, and that's why we respond in the way we do. And that stays with you for such a long time. Those echoes are sitting out there, waiting for us. But using these techniques, you can completely change that picture, let all of the trauma go, and completely change what happened. So you no longer have to feel that way. And although some of those people that we work with had experienced for the whole 4 years of the war the most terrible things that were happening, we only spent 4 hours with each of them and worked on, for some of them, several different memories during that time, a number of them. But there in no way could we have covered all the amount of things that had happened during 4 years, and yet they all made such big changes.
That's brilliant.
So this year, the charity invited us back, but this time to train volunteers in Bosnia
that's more important,
to be practitioners themselves, which just demonstrates really how effective they feel that these techniques are.
Thank you very much for telling us.
Welcome.
Thank you.